Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to tell you the story of single women in ancient Rome. First, sit back, close your eyes, and let yourself be swept up away by the story. Subscribe to my channel, and please don't forget to leave a comment, The 1st century before the Common Era, as the early light of morning filters over the event hill, the city is just shaking off its sleep. The narrow streets are damp, smoke from the bakeries rises toward the sky, and the voices of water carriers echo between the insulae. In the midst of this crowd, on the 3rd floor of a 5-story apartment block, a woman named Claudia opens her eyes. She has no husband. She has no father. The bond of patronage that once offered her some protection has weakened over the years. Claudia is one of those rare women whom law placed in an unusual position for her time. Sui iuris, under her own legal guardianship. In Roman society, women were generally subject to the guardianship of a man. This arrangement was known as tutela and was typically assumed by a father, husband, or male relative. However, as the law evolved from the late Republic onward, and particularly with the forms of the August Age, some women who had borne 3 or who met certain other conditions could be exempted partially or entirely from this guardianship. Claudia is one of these women, but this freedom has brought with it both solitude and responsibility. Chapter 2. The Insula. A life behind walls. The Insula, where Claudia lives, the multi-story rental apartment block, is an inseparable part of Rome's urban fabric. In the complaints set down by the poet Juvenal, we learn how precarious and perilously tall these structures could be. The upper floors are cheaper but riskier, perpetually threatened by fire, structural collapse, and damp. The wealthier tenants occupy the lower floors. Claudia is on the middle floor. 2. She stands somewhere in the middle of Rome's social hierarchy. Every morning she makes use of a communal fountain in the shared courtyard, for there is no private plumbing in her rooms. Neighbors know each other's business, watch each other's and goings. A woman living alone is not unheard of. Widows, divorcees, and freed women who have broken their bonds of servitude all make their lives in this crowded quarter of the city. Yet Claudia's situation still draws attention, for she is neither a widow in the traditional sense, nor could she be considered poor. That attention takes different forms: curiosity, quiet contempt, sometimes a barely concealed admiration. Claudia has grown accustomed to these glances over time. She neither refuses them nor invites them. She simply carries them. Chapter 3. The language of cloth. The stola and identity. In Rome, Ward told the world who you were. The stola, a long, flowing garment worn by freeborn citizen women, and especially by married women and widows of standing, was draped over the body, with the palla drawn over it as an outer wrap whenever a woman ventured outside. This clothing was a kind of passport. The woman who wore it represented particular status, a particular moral identity. To touch her, to accost her in word or deed, could be treated as a legal offense. The stola did not render a woman invisible in public life. Rather, it ensured that society read her within a specific frame. Claudia puts on her stola with care each morning. That care is not aesthetic, it is strategic. A woman who wears the garments of a matrona is to a certain standard of behavior, and society extends a degree of respect to those who meet that expectation. Claudia uses this expectation as both a shield and a guide. She has learned to move through the forum without drawing unwanted attention, her presence not unsettling. This is a subtle skill she has refined over years. Chapter Haviv: Economic Independence. Reality or illusion? Roman, a woman of sui juris status to acquire property, inherit assets, held assets, and enter into contracts to a certain degree. By the standards of the ancient world, this was a remarkable legal capacity, yet social reality did not always align with the written law. Claudia rents out a small shop she inherited from her father. The income is enough to cover her rent and basic provisions. Even so, to operate in the world of Aras, she requires a male intermediary, a procurator. It was socially difficult for women to be direct parties to major legal transactions. And so many women occupied the position of the one behind the curtain, yet the true source of decisions. Claudia is precisely this: unseen but functional, silent but strategic. Her procurator, a man named Gaius, carries out her instructions. But very few people know whose instructions they truly are. This arrangement is a typical example of the informal power relations that operated in countless corners of Rome. Chapter V: The Voice of the Market. The Macellum and daily trade each morning. In the early hours, Claudia makes her way to the Macellum, the covered market. Near the heart of the city, Rome's great markets were not merely places to purchase food. They were where the pulse of the city beat, where gossip and news flowed freely, where social standing was on constant display, moving between stalls of fresh fish, olive oil, cheese, bread, and dried legumes. Claudia is not simply shopping. She is observing. Who is selling? Who is buying? Which merchant's business is faltering? Which household has begun to tighten its belt? All of this she absorbs on these walks. Information in Rome is among the most valuable of commodities, and Claudia knows this well. She builds brief, courteous relationships with the vendors. She does not speak at length, but she asks enough. The Macellum is not, for her, a marketplace. It is an observatory. This daily ritual grants her an insight into the condition of the city that no written source could provide. Chapter Fees. Social networks and the secret of the baths in Rome. Social relationships are among the most essential tools of survival. So it is for Claudia, during the morning hours set aside for women at the baths, the thermae. She speaks with her neighbors, with the wives of shopkeepers, and, occasionally, with the attendants of senators. These conversations appear ordinary, but they are profoundly functional. Who is selling which property? Whose shop is about to close? In which neighborhood have rents begun to fall? Roman bathhouses were not only centers of hygiene. They were hubs of informal information exchange. Historians have documented how these spaces served as places social networks took shape for both men and women. In the larger baths, men's, women's sections were either separate or assigned different hours. Claudia weaves her network in these spaces, identifying those worth keeping close, quietly distancing herself from those she finds unreliable. The baths are not, for her, a place of rest. They are an active workspace. Chapter Spirit and Women. Religious life. Religious formed an invisible but powerful link in the chain of Claudia's social world. Visits to the Temple of Vesta, Paxipine and the rites of Bonadi, and the rituals of the cult of Isis, a cult particularly widespread among lower and middle-class urban women. All created spaces where women gathered, spoke, and found a degree of solidarity with one another. The cult of Isis offered something distinct from Rome's traditional religious structure. The image of a universal goddess, the promise of individual salvation, and communal ethos that did not divide by gender. For this reason it attracted particular enthusiasm among freeborn women and freed women alike. Claudia is part of this cult. The temple offers her not only spiritual shelter, but regular opportunities to meet the women she knows and to exchange information. In Rome, the boundary between religion and practical life was extraordinarily thin, and Claudia navigates that thin line with practiced ease. Chapter 5. The pressure to remarry, and the decision not to the Lex Julia de Maritandis Ordinibus, enacted it in the age of Augustus, encouraged widows and divorced women to remarry within a specified period. Under these laws, women below a certain age who failed to marry within the allotted time could lose certain privileges, including inheritance rights. For the Roman state, marriage was a matter of population and moral order. Claudia feels this pressure. Neighbors ask questions. Relatives occasionally propose suitable candidates. But Claudia resists. Remarrying could endanger the sui iuris status she has worked so carefully to protect. A husband could establish a new guardianship over her, or at the very least, social expectations could render her dependent once again on another person. This resistance demands courage. Claudia sustains it with the composure and shrewdness she has developed over years. Women in Rome who chose not to remarry were far from unknown, but such a choice always carried a price. Social criticism, legal disadvantages, and at times economic vulnerability. Claudia has chosen to pay that price. Chapter IX. Before the law and property in Roman law. A woman's ability to draw up a will depended on conditions that varied across different eras. In the early Republic, this was all but impossible. But by the time of the Empire, the legal possibilities had expanded considerably, particularly vague for women of sui status. Claudia is aware of this right. As the owner of a modest property and a few items of value, the question of to whom she will leave her estate is for her both a practical and an existential matter. Having no children Claudia is considering leaving her property to a distant relative, or perhaps to a temple. But more than the destination of the bequest, it is the very existence of the will that matters to her. It gives her a sense of power. The thought that her decisions might remain valid even after her death carries enormous weight within these small rooms. The notes she has had set down on a wax tablet will be formalized by a notarius at one of Rome's legal offices, and these documents will make her present even after her body is gone. This is one of the most tangible forms of immortality. Rome could offer a woman, chapter et, slavery, and life between borders. Roman society was composed of layers, and the movement between those layers presented a complexity far beyond modern imagination. In Claudia's household, a slave works in her service. Keeping a single domestic servant was a common practice even for the middle classes. Her relationship with this slave has moved beyond a simple master-slave dynamic over the years, developing into a particular mutual dependence and a carefully measured closeness. Claudia is contemplating manumission, freeing the slave. The act of manumitio in Rome was a formal affair carried out through specific rituals. The freed slave would receive of the title of libertus or liberta, and the relationship between the two parties would continue as one of patron and client. This relationship did not release the freed person entirely. It simultaneously protected and constrained them within the patron's sphere of influence. Claudia understands this complexity. Freeing a slave is not a gesture. It is a matter of long-term strategy. A loyal free ally, or the preservation of the existing arrangement? This question tests her moral limits and her practical intelligence in equal measure. Chapter 2z. The dangers of the city. Night, fire, and uncertainty. By day, Rome was vivid and deafening. By night, it was dangerous and dark. There was no systematic infrastructure for lighting the streets. Wealthy households moved through the city accompanied by servants carrying torches, while ordinary women walking alone in the city night, and so Claudia does not go out after dark. This is both a rule and a simple fact of life. The threat of fire was another of Rome's constant nightmares. Insulae built of wood and clay could catch a light with terrifying speed. Though the great fire of Nero's reign lay a century back, the collective memory had not released it. Before lying down at night, Claudia, that ensures that the flame in her hearth has gone out. This ritual is the concrete expression of a profound existential vigilance. To live alone in the city required making small calculations every day. Streets tick. To pause, turn home. Claudia makes these calculations without thinking now. They have become as natural to her as breathing. Chapter Cur. The sounds of evening and tomorrow's reckoning as the sun lowers over the Tiber. Claudia stands at her window, looking out. The street vendors are calling their last cries of the day. The shops are closing, and night is turning Rome into a different city altogether. In the small room of her insula, by candlelight, she goes over her accounts. tomorrow the shop rent. The day after, the water seller must be paid. This month, a small offering is owed to the temple. Everything is calculated, everything balanced. Claudia's life is not a great one, but it is solid. She moves not in someone else's shadow, but in her own name. This is not the story of an exceptional woman in ancient Rome. Women like her have existed throughout history, most often without names, yet weaving invisible threads through the fabric of the city. Archaeological records, papyrus documents, and the wall inscriptions of Pompeii remind us that these women were real. Women who owned property, conducted trade, left offerings at temples, and drew up wills. Claudia is one of them, and her story reminds us that Rome was not built only of marble columns and military victories. It was also built from the city of women who carried water at the first light of morning, tallied shop rents by candlelight, and claimed ownership of their own fate. History remembers the great names, but cities stand on the labor of those whose names we will never know.